The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the grand entrance of the Imperial Hotel, its golden letters gleaming against the marble facade. This hotel was a symbol of luxury, a towering testament to wealth and privilege that had stood for decades as one of the city's most esteemed establishments. Inside, the lobby buzzed with the quiet elegance of affluence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, their light refracting in 1,000 directions, while the soft strains of a classical piano sonata played in the background. The guests, dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, moved with an effortless grace, their every gesture polished, their every word measured. Into this scene of opulence stepped a solitary figure who immediately drew every eye in the room. Elizabeth, an elderly woman in her late 70s, moved slowly, her gait steady but unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. She appeared to be an anachronism in this setting of wealth and refinement. Her clothes, though clean, were old and worn, a faded floral dress paired with a tattered overcoat that had clearly seen better days. A simple, wide-brimmed hat covered her graying hair, casting a shadow over her lined face, and her hands, slightly trembling with age, clutched a small, frayed handbag. As Elizabeth walked through the lobby, there was something subtly different about her demeanor, an air of quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with her humble appearance. Though the staff and guests noticed her shabby attire, few could ignore the way she carried herself, as if she knew the place better than anyone else. Some who saw her even felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity, a vague notion that they had seen her before, but no one could quite place where or when. Elizabeth approached the front desk with a sense of purpose that belied her modest exterior. When she reached the counter, Patricia, the receptionist, barely concealed her distaste. She had been working at the Imperial Hotel for nearly a decade and had seen her fair share of unusual guests, but this woman was different. Elizabeth's appearance was so out of place that Patricia couldn't help but feel a sense of irritation. Her fingers hovered over the reservation system, but she didn't bother to check for availability. Instead, she met Elizabeth's request with a curt response, her voice laced with disdain. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked." The words were a lie, there were plenty of vacancies, but to Patricia, this woman was a nuisance, one to be dealt with swiftly and without ceremony. Elizabeth did not react immediately to the blunt rejection. She simply looked at Patricia, her eyes betraying none of the disappointment or frustration she must have felt. For a moment, there was silence between them, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Patricia felt a flicker of discomfort under the old woman's steady gaze, but she quickly dismissed it, confident in her decision to turn her away. "I see," Elizabeth replied softly, her voice gentle yet firm. "Are you sure? I was told there would be rooms available today." There was a quiet authority in her words, a subtle challenge to Patricia's dismissive attitude. The receptionist, however, was unmoved. Her smile tightened, her patience thinning. "I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. Perhaps you should try another hotel, one more, suited to your needs." The words dripped with condescension, and several nearby staff members smirked, finding amusement in the exchange. Despite the hostile treatment, Elizabeth's eyes flickered with something that looked almost like amusement, an expression so fleeting that Patricia barely noticed it. Elizabeth nodded, thanked Patricia, and turned to leave. As she walked away, one of the bellhops noticed something peculiar. Elizabeth had glanced up at the chandelier in the center of the lobby, a look of recognition crossing her face, as if she were recalling a memory. The bellhop dismissed it as nothing, but the image stayed with him. Outside, the city moved on with its usual rhythm, oblivious to the small drama that had just played out inside the hotel. Elizabeth stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, her thoughts already shifting away from the encounter. She had no intention of letting the rudeness of one person ruin her day. But what the staff didn't realize was that this brief encounter would set off a chain of events that would soon turn their world upside down. No sooner had Elizabeth left the premises than Patricia made her way to the manager's office, eager to report the incident. Richard, the hotel manager, was a man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed, with an air of authority that commanded respect. His office, located just off the main lobby, was a study in modern elegance, dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and a large, polished desk that dominated the room. He looked up from his paperwork as Patricia entered, noting the determined expression on her face. Patricia wasted no time in recounting the encounter with Elizabeth, her voice tinged with a mixture of pride and indignation. She emphasized the woman's shabby appearance, the way she had walked into the hotel as if she belonged there. "I couldn't believe it," Patricia said, her eyes wide with disbelief. She actually had the nerve to ask for a room, as if she could afford to stay here. Richard listened with a neutral expression, though there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. He prided himself on maintaining the hotel's reputation as a bastion of luxury, a place where only the most refined clientele were welcome. The idea that someone like Elizabeth could be allowed to stay there was, to him, unthinkable. "You did the right thing, Patricia," Richard said, his tone approving. "We have a reputation to maintain, and we can't have people like that lowering the standard of our establishment." Patricia smiled, pleased with the manager's praise. Yet, as she recounted the encounter, Richard felt a slight unease. Something in the way Patricia described Elizabeth nagged at him. It was almost as if there was something he should remember, something important. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the tasks at hand. The incident with Elizabeth was just another problem to be dealt with and forgotten. As Patricia left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter with Elizabeth was far from over. But she pushed it to the back of her mind, focusing instead on the many tasks that awaited her. Little did she know, the decisions made that day would soon come back to haunt her, bringing consequences neither she nor Richard could have anticipated. Elizabeth exited the hotel into the cool evening air, her expression unchanged. She paused for a moment at the entrance, glancing back at the grand building before her. For a brief second, a shadow of sadness crossed her face, but she quickly pushed it aside. The Imperial Hotel had been a place of fond memories for her in the past, but today's experience had soured those memories. With a deep breath, she continued down the busy street, blending into the crowd of pedestrians who paid her no mind. As she walked, Elizabeth's thoughts drifted back to her younger days. She remembered the time when she first set foot in the Imperial, not as a guest but as a young woman looking for a job. The hotel had been different then, less grand, but filled with a warmth that had drawn her in. She had worked her way up from a humble maid to a respected manager, learning the ropes of the hospitality industry from the ground up. Those were hard years, but they had shaped her into the person she was today. The Imperial Hotel held a special place in her heart, but now, it seemed the heart of the hotel had changed. Inside the hotel, Patricia watched her go, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. She had done her job, after all, protecting the hotel from an unseemly guest. Yet, as Elizabeth disappeared from view, a strange sense of foreboding began to creep into Patricia's mind. She shook it off, dismissing it as a mere afterthought. After all, what harm could an old woman possibly do? The hotel resumed its normal rhythm, with guests checking in and out, and the staff bustling about their duties. But the impact of Elizabeth's visit lingered, unnoticed, like a faint tremor before an earthquake. The stage was set, and the first act of the unfolding drama had come to a close. What none of them knew was that this encounter was only the beginning, and the ripples it created would soon grow into waves that would crash over the entire hotel. As the days passed, whispers began to circulate among the staff about the strange woman who had been turned away. The details of her appearance and the quiet dignity with which she had left were recounted with varying degrees of exaggeration. Some described her as a beggar trying to infiltrate the luxury hotel, while others speculated that she might have been a spy from a rival establishment sent to test the hotel's standards. In the employee break room, the story became a topic of daily conversation. "Did you hear about the old woman?" one of the bellhops asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Patricia says she just walked in like she owned the place." "Can you imagine?" The others chuckled, each adding their own embellishments to the tale. The more they talked about it, the more the story took on a life of its own, becoming a legend among the staff. Yet, amid the gossip, there were whispers of something more, quiet conversations in corners where staff members shared their unease. "She didn't act like a beggar," one of the maids said one day, her voice barely above a whisper. "She looked around like she knew the place. I swear I saw her glance at the old photos in the hallway like she recognized them." Another nodded in agreement, recalling how Elizabeth had paused at the front desk, her gaze lingering on a framed portrait of the hotel's founder. "It was almost like she was looking at an old friend," they said, and for a moment, the break room fell silent as the staff considered the possibility that there was more to this woman than met the eye. Patricia and Richard, however, dismissed these rumors as idle gossip. They believed the matter was resolved and saw no reason to dwell on it. After all, the hotel had not suffered any damage, and the guest in question had left without incident. To them, it was just another day in the life of running a prestigious establishment. Yet, the story of the old woman lingered, and the staff found themselves increasingly curious about who she really was. There was something unsettling about the entire incident, a feeling that grew with each retelling of the tale. Unknown to them all, Elizabeth had not forgotten her experience at the Imperial Hotel. Far from it. She had quietly set in motion plans that would soon turn the lives of the hotel staff upside down, revealing the true cost of their hasty judgments. What they had dismissed as a minor incident would soon escalate into something far more significant, something that would challenge the very foundations of the hotel's reputation. The atmosphere in the hotel began to shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were few and far between, guests calling to inquire about their reservations or ask about the hotel's amenities. But soon, the calls began to change in tone and frequency. More and more people were asking about Elizabeth, though no one seemed to know her by name. The descriptions matched her perfectly. "Is this the hotel where the elderly woman was mistreated?" one caller asked, their voice laced with disapproval. "What kind of establishment are you running?" The staff, particularly those who had been present during Elizabeth's visit, began to feel the pressure. Patricia found herself fielding more questions than she could handle, each one a reminder of the encounter she had tried so hard to forget. The unease that had lingered in the air since Elizabeth's departure now grew into a palpable tension, a sense that something was about to happen. Even the hotel's regular patrons started to act differently, their interactions with the staff tinged with a newfound wariness. Guests who had been coming to the Imperial for years suddenly seemed distant, their smiles less genuine, their requests more curt. It was as if the very soul of the hotel had been disturbed, and the unease was spreading like a slow-moving fog. The staff couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, scrutinized for their every action. Richard, ever the pragmatic manager, tried to reassure his team, insisting that it was just a coincidence, perhaps the result of a misunderstanding. "People love to gossip," he told Patricia one evening after another particularly stressful day. "This will all blow over soon enough." Yet, deep down, even he couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt that something was terribly wrong. As the tension mounted, Richard found himself returning to that nagging thought he had pushed aside, the strange familiarity of the woman they had turned away. Who was she, really? And why did he feel like he had missed something crucial? One morning, a letter arrived at the hotel, addressed specifically to Richard. It was delivered by a courier in a sleek, black suit, who refused to divulge the sender's identity. The envelope was plain, but the paper was of the highest quality, embossed with the logo of a well-known law firm. Richard opened it with growing trepidation, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded the crisp sheet. The letter was brief but direct. It warned of potential legal action due to the mistreatment of a valued individual at the hotel. The tone was formal, yet there was an underlying threat that was impossible to ignore. Richard's heart pounded as he read the words, trying to connect the dots. Who could this letter be referring to? The only incident that came to mind was the old woman, but surely she wasn't the cause of this. He reread the letter, hoping to find some clue that would explain the situation, but there was nothing. The firm that had sent it was one of the most prestigious in the city, known for representing only the wealthiest and most powerful clients. Richard's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the implications. If this was indeed about Elizabeth, then he was in far deeper trouble than he had realized. The staff, already on edge, sensed his distress and began to whisper among themselves, wondering what could have shaken their usually composed manager. Richard considered his options, but there were few. Ignoring the letter was not an option. Such a firm would not issue idle threats. Yet, contacting the law firm directly could escalate the situation further. After a long, sleepless night, Richard decided to wait, hoping that more information would come to light before he took any action. But even as he tried to reassure himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel's troubles were only beginning. The following day, the hotel received an unexpected visitor, Mr. Thompson, a man known throughout the city for his immense wealth and influence. He was not a regular guest at the Imperial Hotel, and his sudden appearance sent shockwaves through the staff. Richard was called to the lobby immediately, where he found Mr. Thompson waiting with an air of barely concealed anger. Mr. Thompson was a tall man in his 60s, with sharp features and a commanding presence. His tailored suit and polished shoes spoke of old money, and the icy stare he leveled at Richard made it clear that he was not a man to be trifled with. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold and measured. Richard, sensing the gravity of the situation, led him to his office without a word. Once inside, Mr. Thompson wasted no time getting to the point. "I'm sure you've received the letter," he began, his tone leaving no room for denial. "What you may not realize is that the woman your staff mistreated is my mother." Richard's blood ran cold. Elizabeth Thompson, one of the key stakeholders in this hotel, and the woman who was turned away because of her appearance. Richard's face paled as the realization hit him. They had not only mistreated a guest, they had insulted the owner's mother. Mr. Thompson's voice was cold as he recounted how his mother had come to the hotel incognito, wanting to experience the service as an ordinary guest. What she had found was contempt and humiliation, all because of her appearance. She wanted to see if the values we claim to uphold actually mean something, Mr. Thompson continued. Clearly, they do not. Richard was at a loss for words. His mind raced, trying to think of a way to salvage the situation, but there was nothing he could say that would undo the damage that had been done. Mr. Thompson's gaze hardened as he delivered his final words. "My mother may be a forgiving woman, but I am not. Rest assured, there will be consequences for this." With that, he stood up and left the office, leaving Richard to grapple with the enormity of his mistake. Panic set in as Richard and Patricia tried desperately to make amends. They attempted to contact Elizabeth, sending messages, flowers, and apologies, hoping to convey their deep regret. But every effort was met with silence. Elizabeth had retreated from their reach, and the weight of their actions began to sink in. Richard's sleepless nights were filled with anxiety, knowing that his career, and possibly the future of the hotel, hung in the balance. He replayed the events of that day over and over in his mind, wishing he could go back and make different choices. But there was no going back, no undoing what had been done. Patricia, once confident and dismissive, now felt a deep sense of guilt gnawing at her conscience. She couldn't shake the memory of Elizabeth's calm demeanor, and the realization that they had wronged someone so profoundly shook her to her core. The hotel, once a symbol of luxury and refinement, now felt like a prison of their own making. Every interaction, every guest who looked at them with curiosity or judgment, reminded them of their mistake. And with each passing day, the possibility of forgiveness seemed to slip further away. The staff, once united in their commitment to excellence, now found themselves divided, each person wondering who might be next to face the consequences of their actions. Richard knew that time was running out. He had seen the look in Mr. Thompson's eyes, and he knew that the man was not bluffing. The thought of losing everything he had worked for filled him with dread, but more than that, he was haunted by the knowledge that he had brought this upon himself. Patricia, too, was consumed by guilt, her thoughts dominated by the image of Elizabeth's disappointed gaze. In their desperation, they began to turn on each other, each blaming the other for what had happened. But deep down, they both knew that the fault lay with them both. As Richard and Patricia grappled with their guilt, Elizabeth's life story began to unfold in a series of flashbacks. Born into poverty, she had worked tirelessly from a young age, determined to escape the circumstances that had defined her early years. Her journey was one of resilience and quiet strength, as she navigated the challenges of a world that often overlooked women of her background. Elizabeth's modesty had always been a source of pride for her, even after she amassed her fortune. She believed in staying true to her roots, never forgetting where she came from. Her appearance, though unassuming, was a deliberate choice, a reminder of the life she had lived and the values she held dear. But beneath that modest exterior lay a woman of immense power and influence, one who commanded respect in circles far beyond the reach of the Imperial Hotel. Her decision to visit the hotel in such humble attire was not just a test of their service, but a reflection of her belief in the dignity of all people, regardless of their appearance. Elizabeth had never sought to flaunt her wealth. Instead, she had used it to uplift others, to provide opportunities for those who, like her, had started with nothing. The hotels she owned were renowned for their commitment to fairness and respect, and she had always believed that the true measure of a person lay in their character, not their bank account. But as the years passed, Elizabeth had grown concerned that the values she held dear were being eroded by the very people she trusted to uphold them. She had seen the subtle shift in attitudes, the growing emphasis on appearances, and the increasing disregard for those who didn't fit the mold of wealth and privilege. It was this concern that had driven her to test the staff of the Imperial Hotel, to see if they still honored the principles that had guided her life. The visit had confirmed her worst fears. The contempt and disdain she had encountered had been a stark reminder of how far the hotel had strayed from its original mission. Elizabeth knew that the time had come to take action, to ensure that the values she had built her empire on were not lost. But first, she would make sure that those who had wronged her understood the full extent of their mistake. The hotel's board of directors convened an emergency meeting, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on everyone present. Elizabeth sat at the far end of the table, her expression unreadable as the discussion unfolded. The other board members were visibly uncomfortable, aware that their decisions in the coming hours would have far-reaching consequences. The conversation quickly turned to the incident with Elizabeth, with each member expressing their shock and dismay at how she had been treated. Richard's name was mentioned repeatedly, his actions condemned as unbecoming of someone in his position. There was talk of damage control, of how they could possibly salvage the hotel's reputation in the wake of such a scandal. But Elizabeth remained silent throughout the meeting, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her. It wasn't until the very end, when the board turned to her for guidance, that she finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was a steely resolve in her words that left no room for doubt. There would be consequences for those who had failed her. The board deliberated for hours, weighing the options before them. Some members argued for leniency, suggesting that Richard's actions, while misguided, were not entirely without justification. Others were more severe, demanding his immediate dismissal to send a clear message about the hotel's values. Throughout it all, Elizabeth listened carefully, her expression giving nothing away. When the decision was finally made, it was Elizabeth who delivered the verdict. Richard would be removed from his position as manager, effective immediately. The board's vote was unanimous, a rare occurrence that underscored the seriousness of the situation. Richard, who had once been the face of the hotel's success, now found himself cast out, his reputation in tatters. As he left the boardroom, Richard's thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, regret, and disbelief. He had built his career on the belief that appearances were everything, but now he was learning the hard way that true value lay in something far deeper. Patricia, on the other hand, had a different response to her fall from grace. As the board turned to address her role in the incident, she broke down, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded for forgiveness. Unlike Richard, she did not try to defend her actions. Instead, she recounted her own struggles, the challenges she had faced in her life that had led her to believe that only the rich and powerful were deserving of respect. Her words were filled with raw emotion, and for the first time, the board saw a different side of Patricia, a woman who had lost her way, but who now sought redemption. Elizabeth listened intently, and when Patricia finished, she surprised everyone by offering her a chance at redemption. Elizabeth proposed that Patricia take on a new role within the hotel chain, one that would require her to work closely with people from all walks of life. It was an opportunity for Patricia to learn the value of humility and empathy, qualities that Elizabeth believed were crucial for anyone in the hospitality industry. Patricia accepted the offer with gratitude, vowing to never again judge someone based on their appearance. While Patricia was given a path to redemption, Richard's fate was far less forgiving. Elizabeth had seen through his attempts to justify his actions, recognizing the arrogance that had driven him to mistreat her. His downfall was swift and final. Within days of the board meeting, he was officially removed from his position, his belongings cleared out of the manager's office. The staff, who had once looked up to Richard as a leader, now viewed him with a mix of pity and disdain. He had been a man who valued power and status above all else, and in the end, it was those very things that had led to his undoing. As Richard left the hotel for the last time, there was no fanfare, no final words of farewell, just the cold realization that his career was over. With nowhere else to turn, Richard retreated into obscurity, a stark reminder of the dangers of letting pride and prejudice cloud one's judgment. His story served as a cautionary tale for the remaining staff, who now understood the true meaning of integrity and respect. In the weeks that followed, Patricia began her new role under Elizabeth's supervision. It was a drastic change from her previous position, and the adjustment was not easy. But with Elizabeth's guidance, Patricia slowly started to see the world through a different lens. She interacted with people from diverse backgrounds, learning to appreciate their stories and struggles. Elizabeth's mentorship was strict but fair. She pushed Patricia to confront her biases and to develop a genuine compassion for others. It was a humbling experience, but one that Patricia embraced wholeheartedly. Over time, she found herself growing not just as an employee, but as a person. The bond between Patricia and Elizabeth deepened as they worked together. What began as a relationship of mentor and mentee gradually evolved into one of mutual respect and understanding. Patricia came to realize that true leadership was not about commanding authority, but about inspiring trust and showing kindness. Meanwhile, Richard's departure left a void in the hotel's management that needed to be filled. The board, now more cautious than ever, took their time in selecting a new manager, someone who would embody the values that Elizabeth had championed. In the interim, Elizabeth herself took on a more active role in the day-to-day operations, ensuring that the changes she envisioned were implemented. As for Richard, he struggled to come to terms with his new reality. Without the power and prestige he had once enjoyed, he was forced to confront the emptiness of his previous life. The arrogance that had once defined him was replaced by a deep sense of regret, but by then, it was too late for any redemption. Richard's story faded into obscurity, a forgotten chapter in the hotel's history. But the lessons learned from his downfall remained. The hotel staff, now under Elizabeth's watchful eye, became more mindful of their actions, understanding that their behavior reflected not just on the hotel, but on themselves as individuals. The culture of the hotel began to shift, with a renewed focus on empathy and respect for all guests, regardless of their appearance or status. Under Elizabeth's leadership, the hotel underwent a significant transformation. New policies were introduced, emphasizing the importance of treating every guest with dignity and respect. Staff training programs were revamped to focus on compassion and understanding, ensuring that what had happened to Elizabeth would never happen again. Patricia, now fully immersed in her new role, became a key figure in this transformation. She worked tirelessly to support Elizabeth's vision, her own experiences serving as a powerful reminder of the consequences of prejudice. The staff began to see her in a new light, respecting her not just for her position, but for the personal growth she had achieved. As the hotel's culture evolved, so too did its reputation. Word spread of the changes, and soon, the Imperial Hotel became known not just for its luxury, but for its commitment to inclusivity and kindness. Elizabeth's influence was felt in every corner of the establishment, and the once tarnished reputation of the hotel began to shine once more. The changes at the hotel did not go unnoticed by its guests. Regular patrons remarked on the improved atmosphere, noting how the staff seemed more attentive and genuinely caring. New guests, drawn by the hotel's newfound reputation, found themselves pleasantly surprised by the warmth and hospitality they encountered. For Patricia, the journey had been one of profound personal growth. She had learned to see beyond appearances, to value people for who they were rather than what they looked like. The lessons she had learned under Elizabeth's mentorship stayed with her, shaping not just her career, but her life. Elizabeth, for her part, was pleased with the progress the hotel had made. She knew that the changes would have a lasting impact, not just on the staff, but on everyone who passed through the hotel's doors. The experience had reaffirmed her belief in the importance of humility and respect, values that she would continue to uphold in all aspects of her life. As time went on, Elizabeth's role in the hotel became more prominent. She was celebrated not just as a stakeholder, but as the heart and soul of the establishment. Her wisdom and leadership had transformed the hotel into a place where everyone was welcome, where the true measure of a person was not their wealth or status, but their character. The story of Elizabeth's visit and the lessons that followed became a part of the hotel's legacy, shared with new staff members as a reminder of the values they were expected to uphold. The hotel's commitment to inclusivity and respect became a defining feature, attracting guests from all walks of life. Elizabeth's influence extended beyond the hotel, inspiring others in the industry to adopt similar practices. Her legacy was one of kindness, compassion, and the belief that true luxury lay not in opulence, but in the way people were treated. It was a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. In the quiet of her private office, Elizabeth sat by the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. The events of the past few months had been challenging, but they had also brought about meaningful change. She reflected on the journey she had taken, from a young girl struggling to make her way in the world, to the influential woman she had become. The hotel was thriving, its reputation restored, and its future secure. But more than that, Elizabeth was content knowing that the values she held dear had taken root in the hearts of those around her. She had seen firsthand the impact of kindness and humility, and she knew that those lessons would continue to resonate long after she was gone. As the sun set on another day, Elizabeth smiled, at peace with the knowledge that she had made a difference. The journey had been long, but it had been worth every step. And as she looked to the future, she knew that the legacy she had built would continue to grow, touching the lives of countless others along the way.